Black man gave up his first-class seat for pregnant woman. Then she did this. He was known to keep to himself. Some said it was out of shyness. Others believed it was years of unfair judgment that made him cautious. When he boarded the plane that morning, he never imagined a single gesture of kindness would alter his path forever. He tried to ignore the curious glances that sometimes followed him whenever he found himself in luxurious places. First-class cabins weren't exactly filled with folks who looked like him, yet he had earned the ticket the same as anyone else. A short, polite smile flickered on his face as he settled in. He wasn't there for the fancy meal or the champagne. He simply needed to travel for work, an opportunity he'd worked countless hours to secure. He set his leather backpack beneath the seat, pulled out a worn paperback he had been reading for weeks, and flipped to where he left off. He sank into the comfortable cushion. Something in him relaxed. The flight attendant approached, offering water or juice, and he asked for a glass of orange juice, feeling parched. He nearly dozed off right there, lulled by the hum of the plane's engines, but paused to note the people drifting in around him. His mind wandered to the days that had led him here. He thought of his mother's unwavering support, how she believed in him when no one else did. As a teenager, he'd been labeled trouble, too many run-ins with teachers who assumed the worst. But his mother wouldn't let him slip into that narrative. She insisted he work harder, push further, and climb beyond anyone's expectations. Now, as a data analyst at a growing tech company, he was traveling for an important contract that might open even bigger doors. But old doubts still crept in. Sometimes, in the corners of his mind, he heard the echoes of people who never believed in him. He nearly drifted off until he heard soft murmuring and frantic whispers. Peering around, he saw a woman standing in the aisle. She appeared unsteady on her feet. One hand clasped the overhead bin as though trying to stay balanced. Her other hand rested on her rounded belly. Clearly pregnant, she was scanning the first-class seats as though searching for something or someone. By her side stood a man, nervous, perhaps equally concerned. The flight was full. Nobody in the plush seat seemed willing to budge. The woman looked exhausted, the man's eyebrows knitted with worry. Eventually, they both sighed and glanced down the aisle, where they had been assigned seats in the back. He watched the woman's shoulders sag. Whether it was physical fatigue or emotional exhaustion, he felt a pang of empathy. He imagined the cramped seats, the potential long flight ahead, and how stressful that would be for an expectant mother. His gaze traveled to the empty seat beside him. He had paid extra for first class, but the simple truth remained. She needed it more. Without another thought, he rose and tapped the woman's shoulder. She turned, surprised to see him standing there, offering a gentle smile. "Ma'am, please take my seat," he said quietly. "You'll be more comfortable here." Her eyes widened in astonishment. The man beside her blinked in confusion. For a moment, it seemed neither knew how to react. Then a wave of relief washed over her face. She had no idea how to react, but his mind was made up. He gave a small nod, picked up his backpack, and gestured for her to sit. The flight attendant, who had been witnessing the scene, gave him an approving nod as she helped the woman settle into the seat. The man, who introduced himself as the woman's husband, mouthed a heartfelt thank you. The passenger, who had watched from across the aisle, cleared his throat, momentarily disarmed by the quiet selflessness of the gesture. He turned toward Coach, weaving through the narrow walkway with his bag slung over his shoulder. He could feel more stares and hear whispers of curiosity. Eventually, he found the only available seat near the back, squeezed between two large individuals who seemed less than thrilled about the arrangement. But he didn't complain. He tried to fold himself into the seat. At least he had the window. That was something. He inhaled, reminded himself that it was only a few hours. The engine roar grew louder. The plane raced along the runway, lifting skyward, and he found himself pinned to the seat as they ascended. He cast a brief glance at the bright morning sky before closing his eyes, feeling the press of the people next to him. He didn't expect anything more from the pregnant woman or her husband. A simple thank you was enough. But life has a strange way of intertwining paths. By the time the flight landed, his casual act of generosity would spin into consequences far beyond a single seat swap. Exhausted from the flight, he disembarked later than everyone else. He trudged into the airport, waiting in line for a coffee to wake him up. He had a meeting to attend in just a few hours. He rummaged for his wallet and looked up to find the pregnant woman's husband standing in front of him. "Hey," the man said, offering a nervous grin. "I just wanted to thank you again. My wife's name is Sarah, and I'm Mike. You really helped her out. She had some complications last month, and sitting in coach would have been tough on her." He nodded, trying to brush it off. "It's all right. I'm just glad she could be comfortable. Mike asked his name. He introduced himself as Marcus. They shook hands and Mike insisted on buying his coffee. Marcus felt awkward accepting. But Mike wouldn't take no for an answer. After they placed their orders, Mike explained they were in town because Sarah's father had recently passed, and she wanted to gather with her family before giving birth. Marcus offered condolences, uncertain if he should pry further. Mike's sincerity, however, was disarming. He seemed to have a grateful, earnest quality, eager to pay back kindness in kind. Before parting ways, Mike insisted they exchange numbers. Marcus wasn't sure if anything would come of it, but the man seemed insistent. They parted on a warm note, and Marcus hurried off to his meeting. He saw no sign of Sarah and felt a quiet hope that she was resting or had found a calmer environment after the stress of travel. He arrived at the downtown office of a prestigious firm that was considering awarding Marcus's company a large contract. Marcus had studied all the data. He was determined to deliver a pitch that would make them trust his firm's analytical expertise. In the conference room, he took a seat at a long glass table, facing two stern-faced executives. A middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun and a younger man tapping a pen on the table. Their expressions gave nothing away. Marcus had to push aside any lingering nerves. He'd prepared for weeks, practically memorizing data sets, anticipating questions. As he explained the scope of what his company could offer, he detected subtle flickers of intrigue in their eyes. But halfway through his presentation, the older woman gave him a hard look. "What makes you think your team can handle this project? We've spoken to a lot of firms. Many have more experience in the field than you do." Her voice was sharp, echoing with the unspoken question, "Why should we trust you?" He steadied himself. "We may be a younger firm," he replied, "but we've got a diverse, talented team that's already delivered results for organizations like yours. We integrate fresh approaches with reliable data analytics. We're nimble, adaptable, and resourceful. You'll get a personalized focus you can't find at larger corporations that rely on old methods." He offered a carefully placed smile, though he could tell she was still unconvinced. The younger man chimed in, acknowledging the data Marcus had provided. There was a flicker of hope in Marcus's chest. He launched into a detail about projection models. Moments later, he witnessed their guarded gazes soften, replaced by a sense of cautious approval. When he finished, both executives stood, shook his hand, and promised to be in touch. He left the building uncertain, but at least he felt he hadn't stumbled. As he walked out onto the busy city street, he turned his phone back on. 2 missed calls from an unknown number, then a text from Mike. "We'd love to treat you to dinner." The invitation felt odd, but something about the situation tugged at him. He had no family in town, and truth be told, loneliness often crept in on these work trips. He rarely traveled for pleasure, so an offer of company and gratitude could be a welcome break. He found a moment to text back, saying he was free that evening. Shortly after, Mike sent an address and time. That evening, he made his way to a modest bistro tucked away from the main avenues. A gentle light glowed from within. Mike stood outside, waving. Sarah was beside him, her face lit with a warm smile. She walked carefully, but there was a calmness about her. They welcomed Marcus like an old friend, ushering him inside. Soft jazz notes played in the background. They chose a round table near the corner, a comfortable spot for conversation. The server arrived, handing out menus and pouring water. Sarah expressed her gratitude firsthand. "I don't think I truly thanked you," she said, her eyes glimmering with genuine appreciation. "That plane ride was longer than I expected, and with everything going on, I was at the end of my rope." He shrugged gently. "I'm happy to help, really," Mike chimed in, describing how anxious he'd been. "You saw how nobody else even moved. It's one of those moments where you realize how rare kindness can be." Mike exchanged a glance with Sarah. "We know it might sound strange, but there's something we wanted to talk to you about." Marcus raised an eyebrow, uncertain. "Sure." Mike and Sarah looked at each other again, as if deciding who should speak first. Finally, Sarah took a breath. "We're having this baby soon. My due date is only weeks away. We came here to handle my father's estate. It's complicated, and we could really use some help." She paused, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. "We don't expect you to solve our problems, but we have a sense that you're someone we can trust." Marcus was taken aback. "Me? You hardly know me." Sarah nodded. "We know. That's part of why this is awkward. But you offered up your seat. No questions asked. Most people wouldn't do that. It just made us think that we'd like to work with someone who cares more about doing the right thing than their own comfort." Mike cleared his throat. "Sarah's dad had a business. We don't know the full scale of it yet. There's some complex financial stuff. We were hoping to find someone with data expertise who could sift through the numbers. We have an attorney, but we need a clearer picture of what we're dealing with. We can pay you. Probably not at the level your firm pays you, but it's a side project. Are you interested? Marcus's mind spun. He'd come to this city for an official pitch, and now here was a personal request for help. He asked a few cautious questions. What kind of business was it? How much data are we talking about? Sarah explained that her father ran an import-export company. After his death, she discovered there were multiple accounts, perhaps some off-the-books transactions, and many confusing spreadsheets that seemed incomplete. I don't suspect anything illegal, she said, her voice wavering slightly. But my dad had a habit of trusting the wrong people. I want to know if someone might be taking advantage of us. Marcus considered the possibility. It would require time, but it could be done in off hours. He was also struck by how powerless Sarah seemed, dealing with her father's death and preparing to become a mother. Sure, he said, surprising himself. I can look at it. Send me what you have, and I'll see what I can do. Sarah's relief was palpable. She visibly relaxed, leaning back in her chair. Mike wore a broad grin. They ordered dinner, and for a moment the mood lifted. They spoke about everyday things, the name they had in mind for the baby, how Marcus got into data analytics, Sarah's childhood memories of her father. Gradually, the conversation circled back to one subtle topic that neither Mike nor Sarah had voiced explicitly: the uneasy tension they sometimes felt around certain people's reactions to them. Sarah was white, Mike was also white, and Marcus was black. The dynamic of the dinner, with them in a small bistro, drew occasional glances. But within the comfortable bubble of their conversation, those glances seemed distant. After dinner, they walked out together. The night air was crisp. Sarah asked if Marcus needed a ride anywhere, but he waved it off, mentioning he had a hotel nearby. They parted ways with a genuine sense of connection, though none of them could predict how entwined their fates would become. The next day, Marcus woke to an email from Sarah. There was an attached folder, dozens of scanned documents, ledger sheets, partial bank statements. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, opened his laptop, and began analyzing the labyrinth of figures. The deeper he went, the more questions arose. He noticed some repeated transactions that made no sense, large sums of money funneling through multiple sub-accounts. He realized this could be more complicated than any of them suspected. However, he had to balance this new side project with his official work. That afternoon, the prospective client from the day before requested a second meeting. Marcus left the tangled finances for a time and headed back to the office building. This time, the younger executive smiled more openly. "We appreciate your thoroughness," he said, guiding Marcus into a smaller conference room. "We want to meet the rest of your team. Maybe set up a conference call next week." Marcus agreed, feeling a spark of hope. He left the meeting in good spirits, but as he stepped onto the busy sidewalk, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He answered cautiously, only to hear a voice he hadn't expected. "Marcus, it's Mike. Look, I'm really sorry to bother you. Sarah is in the hospital. It's probably nothing serious, but the doctor wants to keep her overnight. She was dizzy, so we came in as a precaution. Just wanted to keep you updated. She specifically asked me to let you know." A wave of concern swept him. He asked if they needed anything. Mike hesitated. "We're okay, I think. Just concerned. Keep going with the documents if you can." "We'll connect soon," Marcus agreed, adrenaline buzzing in his veins. He found a taxi heading back to his hotel. He opened his laptop again, pushing aside his mounting worry for Sarah. A gnawing dread formed in his gut as he sifted through more of her father's finances. It wasn't adding up. Some transactions bore cryptic references to shipping containers, but the amounts seemed inflated. He stumbled upon names, some that seemed legitimate, others suspicious. Was this purely mismanagement, or something more sinister? He forced himself to take a break, trying not to read too much into the data just yet, but the patterns hinted at a possible scam or illegal operation, leaving him more uneasy with each discovery. That night, he hardly slept. His thoughts kept spinning. He pictured Sarah and Mike struggling with hospital stress, the baby's well-being overshadowing everything. Then he thought of how easily he had stepped into their lives. A part of him worried that involving himself in their personal matters might lead to trouble. The following morning, Mike called with good news. Sarah was released. The doctors wanted her to rest, to avoid stress. Marcus felt a renewed sense of responsibility. How could she rest if her late father's finances were a mess? He decided to fast-track his analysis, diving headfirst into each line item. He juggled phone calls to old clients, searching for any insight. He scrolled through local business forums, looking for references to Sarah's father's company. Bits and pieces started forming a puzzle. Some shipments seemed legitimate, others suspicious. Certain patterns suggested a partner or employee might be embezzling funds. The next time he met with Sarah and Mike, she looked drained. She pressed a hand to her belly as if assuring the baby that everything was fine. They sat at the same bistro. This time, Sarah sipped tea instead of water. Mike barely touched his coffee. Marcus quietly explained what he had found. The more he spoke, the more troubled they looked. Sarah's voice quivered. "Why would someone do this? My dad wasn't perfect, but he was honest." Mike spoke through clenched teeth. "Is it possible that someone close to your dad has been siphoning money?" Marcus nodded. "It looks that way. I don't have concrete proof yet, but there are consistent anomalies. We should probably take this to your lawyer, and if you trust me, I can keep digging." Sarah exhaled, swallowing hard. "Do it. We need to know." They parted, leaving Marcus with a sense of urgency. The next day, he returned to the offices of the firm he was courting for the big contract. He gave a quick presentation over a working lunch, noticing how his phone buzzed with texts from Mike. The tension tore at him, but he had no choice but to remain focused. If he secured this contract, it would be massive for his career. Yet part of him felt a moral duty to ensure Sarah and Mike weren't left in the dark. He left the meeting feeling that success was near. The executives seemed pleased, promising a final decision soon. Then he hurried to meet Mike at a local coffee shop. Mike's expression was grim. He opened a manila folder, setting it on the table between them. Inside were letters from an unlisted address, demanding money in exchange for unspecified protection services. Mike tapped them nervously. "We found these in Sarah's dad's study." Marcus read the letters. They threatened to expose past mistakes if payments weren't made. The amounts demanded matched some of the suspicious transactions in the accounts. An uneasy chill sank into Marcus's chest. This was no run-of-the-mill embezzlement. It sounded more like blackmail. Mike lowered his voice. "Sarah can't handle this right now. We can't let her stress over it. But I don't know where to turn." Marcus rubbed his temples. "We'll figure it out. You have a lawyer, right?" Mike nodded. "He's good, but he mostly handles estate matters. I don't know if he has the background for something like this." They agreed that Marcus would quietly keep digging, this time focusing on the addresses, names, and references in the letters. That night, Marcus found himself in his hotel room, hunched over his laptop again. The adrenaline made him restless. He chased every lead he could find online, but the addresses turned up nothing conclusive. Could Sarah's father have been involved in something shady, or was he a victim of a con? Marcus's eyes burned from the screen's glare, his mind racing with possibilities. A week passed in a blur of data analysis, tension, and short check-ins from Mike regarding Sarah's health. Marcus continued responding to calls from the prospective client, feeling hopeful that they'd soon sign the contract. Despite the building stress, he sensed a new determination taking shape inside him. He had always been someone who minded his own business, but this time, stepping outside that comfort zone felt like the right thing to do. One afternoon, while wrestling with the documents, Marcus spotted a pattern. The blackmail letters mentioned a shipping route from Asia. The suspicious transactions corresponded to the same shipping route, with repeated references to a local facility. He found a partial match in the city's business registry linking a warehouse to a man named Buck Harris. Marcus had never heard of him. He rummaged through the older files Sarah's father had kept. There was a single note scrawled in the margin of a ledger. "Need to talk to Buck about insurance?" It was dated just a month before Sarah's father passed away. His heart raced. Could Buck be the blackmailer, or was he just another piece of the puzzle? Marcus decided to call Mike immediately. Mike listened, then said, "We should go check it out. Sarah is resting. The doctor put her on bed rest for a few days, so I can slip away for a bit." That evening, they drove out to the address listed for the warehouse. The building stood at the edge of a commercial district, weathered and mostly deserted. The giant, corrugated metal walls loomed behind a locked gate. Mike parked the car a short distance away. The city lights cast an eerie glow on the structure. They got out, peering through the fence. A large sign read Harris Imports. The silence was broken only by a faint hum of traffic on the nearby highway. Mike gripped the gate, rattling it. Locked. A guard might have been on duty somewhere, but no one appeared. Marcus studied the surroundings, trying to decide if they should even be there. They hadn't trespassed, but they were close. Then they heard a shuffle from behind the gates. Out stepped a man in his mid-50s wearing a heavy jacket. He looked at them suspiciously. Mike introduced himself, explaining that Sarah's father had done business with Buck Harris. The man's demeanor changed slightly. "You with the old man's family?" he asked, eyeing them. His glance lingered on Marcus with wariness. "You got any proof?" Mike and Marcus exchanged glances. They had no proof to show beyond the knowledge gleaned from the documents. Mike stammered something about wanting to tie up loose ends. The man shrugged and stepped forward, unlocking the gate. He didn't let them in, but he stood on the other side, arms folded. "I'm just the foreman," he muttered. "Buck ain't here. If you got questions, you'll have to set up a meeting," Mike pressed. "We found some concerning things in the records. Are you aware of any large payments being funneled through here that might not be legitimate?" The foreman frowned, glancing at Marcus. "I don't talk about our finances with strangers, but I know old man Roberts, that's Sarah's dad, had some arrangement with Buck. Roberts would send shipments through our facility. That's all I know." He frowned again, shifting on his feet. "Listen, if you think something illegal is going on, get a warrant or talk to a lawyer." Marcus tried to read the man's body language. It wasn't outright hostility, but something felt off. The foreman rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, Buck's out of town for a couple of days. You want answers? You come back with some official paperwork or talk to him direct." With that, the man stepped back and locked the gate. Mike opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus gently tugged his sleeve, indicating they should leave. There was no point causing a scene. As they walked away, Mike muttered, "Well, that was a bust." Marcus shook his head, feeling more determined. "We'll find a better way. Buck might be in on something, or maybe he's a victim too." They drove back in silence, each lost in thought. Marcus wondered if they should involve the police, but there was no hard evidence, just incomplete ledgers and suspicious letters. And there was Sarah, who didn't need more stress. He also worried about the possibility of jeopardizing his own career. If he got tangled up in an investigation, what would that mean for the contract he was about to secure? Back at his hotel, Marcus tried to sleep, but couldn't. His mind replayed every conversation, every clue. Eventually, he drifted off, only to be awakened at dawn by yet another call from Mike. "Marcus, something's not right," Mike said, panic in his voice. "Our attorney tried to track down some paperwork, but the county office said certain files are sealed. And get this, someone left a note in our mailbox last night. It said, 'Stop digging or else.' Sarah is freaking out." Marcus's stomach tightened, threatening notes. This was escalating. "I'm so sorry this is happening," he said, struggling to find the right words. "Do you want me to come over?" Mike sounded relieved. "Would you? Maybe you can help calm Sarah?" Marcus agreed, quickly dressing and hurrying out. The rideshare dropped him at a quaint neighborhood of tree-lined streets. Mike's house was modest but inviting, with a small front porch. Sarah greeted him at the door, looking tired but determined. She handed him the note. The paper was typed in block letters, stating simply, "Stop asking questions, or you'll regret it." Marcus's first impulse was to tell them to involve the police. Sarah sighed, sinking into an armchair. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But what can the police do with so little evidence?" Mike paced the living room. "We have to keep going. We have to figure out who's behind this. If it's Buck or someone else, we can't let them bully us." Marcus tried to look calm. "I'll keep looking into it, but let's be cautious. No more random visits to the warehouse. We'll gather proof first," Sarah agreed, resting a protective hand on her belly. The baby had started moving a lot, a sign of health, yet each kick reminded them how little time remained until her due date. Marcus promised to remain discreet, balancing this investigation with his professional obligations. He spent the next few days finalizing data for the big contract. A sense of triumph filled him when he finally got the call. His firm had been chosen. The project was his. His boss was elated, offering congratulations from headquarters. Marcus felt a surge of validation. All those years of hard work, the late nights, the doubts, now it felt worth it. Yet a shadow loomed over his excitement. Sarah's crisis remained unresolved. Without a second thought, he decided to stay in town a bit longer, telling his boss he had personal matters to attend to. His boss, impressed with his success, told him to take as much time as he needed. That evening, Mike invited Marcus over for dinner. Sarah tried to mask her worry, but Marcus could see the strain. Over a simple meal, they went over the documents once more. Marcus described his suspicion that the blackmailer had an inside connection, someone who managed the finances closely. They mulled the idea that it could be Buck Harris or one of his employees. Sarah mentioned her father once had a business partner named Ron, who left the company abruptly. She hadn't seen him in years. Mike recalled hearing about Ron in passing. Yeah, your dad used to talk about how they had a falling out, but do you really think Ron would come back and threaten Sarah now? Marcus shrugged. If he had a grudge or if something in the business went sour, it's possible. They decided to track Ron down. Late that night, Marcus found an online listing for a Ron Fletcher, matching the age and region. The next morning, he and Mike drove across town to find the address. It led them to an aging apartment complex in a less affluent part of the city. They knocked on the door, uncertain what to expect. An older man answered. His hair was thinning, and he peered at them with sharp eyes. When they mentioned Sarah's father, the man exhaled a slow breath. He's gone, Ron said in a wistful tone, stepping aside to let them in. The apartment was small, cramped with old furniture. Ron settled into a fraying chair and motioned for them to sit on the couch. He looked tired, as though haunted by unspoken regrets. Mike cleared his throat. We found evidence that someone's blackmailing Sarah. Her father's finances are a mess. We're trying to figure out who's behind it. We thought maybe you'd know something. Ron's eyes clouded with emotion. I left the business because I couldn't stomach some of the deals your father was making. I wanted to remain above board, but he started trusting Buck Harris. I told him Buck was trouble, but he wouldn't listen. He paused, rubbing his temple. I never meant for things to end badly between us. We were friends once, but I walked away when I realized Buck's plans. Marcus leaned forward, heart pounding. What do you know about Buck's plans? Ron's gaze drifted to a dusty window. He's involved in some smuggling operation, precious stones, maybe even illegal items. Your father, rest his soul, believed Buck was just an aggressive businessman, but once I saw the pattern, I couldn't be part of it. I told him to cut ties, but he wouldn't. It wasn't just business. They were personal friends. I suspect Buck convinced him there was nothing illegal going on, just profitable shortcuts. Mike asked, Did my father-in-law know about the blackmail? Ron shrugged. No idea. I do know your father-in-law called me out of the blue a month before he died. He was panicked, talking about needing to secure everything. I told him it was too late. Now you show up, telling me about blackmail. I'm not surprised, honestly. Buck thrives on intimidation. He probably doesn't want Sarah to dig into the finances. Maybe it implicates him. Or maybe he's just trying to keep his empire intact. Marcus felt a swell of anxiety. Could Buck be capable of violence? Ron's words painted a grim picture. They asked if Ron would help them gather evidence. Ron hesitated, looking torn. I'm old. This was all so long ago, but if it'll help Sarah, I'll try. We parted on bad terms, but I don't want her to suffer. They exchanged contact information. As they left the apartment, a sense of dread consumed them. This was bigger than they imagined. If Buck Harris was running an illegal smuggling network, the blackmail letter was just the tip of the iceberg. When Mike and Marcus reported this to Sarah, she went pale. She looked at the framed photo of her father on the mantel. How could he get involved with something like that? She whispered. He was a good man. Marcus's voice was gentle. He might not have known the full extent. Buck could have lied, or your dad trusted him. Either way, we have to be careful. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. This is so overwhelming. They decided to consult Sarah's attorney, a measured man named Bill Peterson. Bill looked alarmed at the mention of Buck Harris and suggested that they discreetly hire a private investigator. That way, they could build a more solid case, possibly involving the authorities at the right time. Marcus volunteered to be the point person with the investigator. He gave Bill all the data he had compiled and even shared Ron's contact. Afterward, Sarah thanked Marcus profusely. He reminded her that he'd done nothing but piece together facts. Still, gratitude shone in her eyes. Sometimes, we just need someone to care enough to help, she said softly. Weeks passed in a tense blur. Sarah's due date inched closer. Mike hovered anxiously, watching for any sign of a suspicious presence near their home. A couple of times, a vehicle parked outside for too long, and Mike sprang into action, only to find it was just a neighbor's friend. The sense of paranoia weighed heavily on them all. Marcus balanced phone calls with the private investigator and updates on his new project. While he was under pressure to deliver results for his firm, he found a renewed sense of purpose in helping Sarah and Mike. Still, the unfolding mystery put knots in his stomach. He worried that at any moment, Buck might escalate his threats. Eventually, the private investigator found something telling. Buck Harris had a known associate with a record of intimidation tactics. This associate's name matched the partial signature on the blackmail letters. It wasn't foolproof evidence, but it was a lead. Bill, the attorney, decided it was time to approach the police quietly. Marcus braced for pushback or skepticism, but the detective they spoke with was surprisingly attentive. They handed over the financial documents, suspicious letters, and the private investigator's notes. The detective promised to look into it, advising them to be vigilant but to avoid rash actions. It was a relief to have the authorities involved, but they had to trust the system would work. Not long after, Mike called Marcus in a panic. They took Sarah to the hospital. Her water broke early. Marcus's heart jumped. He rushed to the hospital, where he found Mike pacing, face pale with worry. Sarah was in a delivery room, surrounded by nurses. Marcus sat with Mike in the waiting area, the tension nearly suffocating. Hours passed. Finally, a nurse emerged, smiling. "You can see her now. The baby's fine." A flood of relief washed over them as they entered the room. Sarah held a tiny bundle, tears of joy on her cheeks. The baby's eyes opened briefly, then closed. Mike kissed Sarah's forehead, whispering how proud he was. Marcus lingered near the doorway, unsure if he should intrude on their family moment. But Sarah beckoned him over. She thanked him again. If he hadn't given up his seat on that flight, she wouldn't have gotten the rest and care she needed. The baby, a little girl, was their new beginning. While Mike and Sarah had this precious moment, Marcus remembered that outside this hospital room, the shadow of Buck Harris remained. For now, he let that worry drift away, focusing on the joy of new life. Soon enough, reality would come knocking. Over the next few days, Sarah recovered. Marcus visited, bringing her favorite tea and offering moral support. They tried not to talk about the blackmail or the investigation in front of the baby. But once they were certain Sarah and the infant were safe at home, Mike confided that the detective had given them a heads up. Buck Harris was being investigated. Search warrants were issued for the warehouse. They hoped it would yield enough to press charges. Marcus felt a measure of cautious optimism. Then came a phone call that shattered their fragile peace. It was Ron, his voice shaking. "I got a call from someone claiming to represent Buck. They said if I keep talking, they'll come after me. Marcus, I don't know what to do. I'm terrified." Marcus took a breath. "Stay calm, Ron. Let me contact the detective right away. Don't answer any unknown calls. If you feel unsafe, call the police." He dialed the detective, who advised Ron to file a formal complaint. Marcus relayed the message. But the sense of dread returned full force. This was more than idle threats. If Buck or his associates felt cornered, they might resort to drastic measures. That night, Marcus paced his hotel room, considering whether he should leave the city or remain until the situation resolved. He decided to stay. He'd come this far, and leaving now felt like a betrayal of Sarah and Mike's trust. Another week passed with no new threats, though the tension remained. The detective assured them that progress was being made. Meanwhile, Sarah focused on caring for her newborn. Mike hovered protectively, and Marcus checked in daily. Finally, the breakthrough arrived. The police raided Buck Harris's warehouse. They found evidence of smuggled items, falsified shipping records, and a trove of documents implicating Buck in multiple scams. The next day, Buck and 2 associates were arrested. The blackmail letters matched documents on their computers, linking them to attempts to strong-arm Sarah's father into enabling illegal shipments. It appeared that once her father realized the truth, he'd threatened to pull out. Buck had turned to blackmail to keep him in line, and after the father's passing, he continued using scare tactics to prevent Sarah from discovering his operation. The relief that washed over Sarah and Mike was monumental. The detective promised that any lingering financial issues would be easier to resolve now that Buck's scheme was exposed. Ron was finally able to breathe, relieved that the threats might stop. Marcus felt a profound satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. It was over, or nearly so. The criminal process would still take time, but the immediate danger had passed. Sarah and Mike invited Marcus over for a quiet celebration dinner. Sarah cradled the baby, who slept peacefully in her arm. Mike offered a toast, holding up a glass of sparkling cider. To Marcus, for his kindness, perseverance, and willingness to stand by us, even when it wasn't his battle. Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks. "I just did what anyone should do," he replied softly. They clinked glasses. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. Sarah gently rocked her, humming a lullaby. Marcus watched them, thinking back to that day on the plane, how a simple decision to give up a first-class seat had led them all to this moment. He'd never intended to become entangled in their lives, but now he felt an unspoken bond with this family. A few days later, Marcus packed his bags, preparing to fly home. He'd done what he came to do professionally, and more. Sarah was in good spirits, the baby thriving, and Mike was eager to settle the estate properly. They had mounds of paperwork, but no more fear of blackmail. As Marcus said his goodbyes, Sarah insisted on hugging him tight. "Thank you, truly," she whispered. "You'll always be welcome in our home." He smiled, holding the sleeping baby's tiny hand for a moment. Mike patted his back in gratitude. "Safe travels, friend. Keep in touch." Marcus nodded, promising he would. He caught a taxi to the airport. In the terminal, memory swirled. It felt surreal to think how everything started with him offering his seat to a pregnant woman. As he boarded his flight, he looked at his ticket. This time, it was also first class, a token from his boss for landing the big contract. Yet he couldn't help scanning the crowd, wondering if someone else needed the seat more than him. But no one seemed in distress or need. He settled in, feeling more at ease with himself, a quiet pride in his chest. As the plane soared into the clouds, he reflected on the unexpected journey. He recalled the tension, the fear, the courage it took for Sarah to push forward, the unwavering loyalty of Mike and the regrets of Ron. Though the path had been tangled with threats and mysteries, there was a silver lining. Sarah's father's name could be cleared. The baby could grow up free from that shadow, and Buck Harris would face justice for his crime. For Marcus, the biggest lesson was that the smallest acts of kindness can open doors to unforeseen challenges and sometimes the greatest rewards. He opened the worn paperback he'd carried for weeks, this time reading the same lines with a new perspective. He realized that life's chapters don't always unfold how you expect, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep turning the page. The flight attendant offered him a glass of orange juice. He smiled, recalling the day he'd asked for the same drink before everything changed. He settled back, determined to savor this moment of peace, the hum of the plane's engines, a steady lullaby of closure and possibility. Back in his hometown, Marcus returned to work. His boss was thrilled with his performance, praising him for securing the contract. Word spread that he had gone above and beyond, impressing clients with his diligence. Yet he found that he'd changed somehow. He began to take a deeper interest in others, noticing small moments where help might be needed. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He'd learned that simply being open-minded and compassionate could create ripples of impact. He kept in touch with Sarah and Mike via text messages and occasional phone calls. They sent pictures of the baby, wide-eyed and curious, growing a little each day. Sarah's voice sounded lighter, relieved of the fear that once weighed her down. A few months later, when the trial against Buck Harris commenced, Sarah testified about what her father had shared, and Ron provided valuable history of the business. Marcus wasn't called to the stand, but he watched from a distance, ready to support them. The prosecution built a solid case. Buck glared daggers at them all in the courtroom, but the evidence was damning. In the end, Buck was convicted on multiple counts, ensuring he wouldn't be a threat again. When Sarah called Marcus with the news, she was almost breathless. "It's finally over," she said, joy mixing with relief. "We can truly move on." He congratulated her, listening as the baby cooed in the background. "I'm glad," he told her. "You all deserve peace." She smiled through the phone line. "You deserve thanks, Marcus, not just for the seat on the plane, but for everything else you did. You believed in us when it got scary, and I'll never forget it." He swallowed, feeling humbled. "I only did what felt right." After the call, he leaned back in his chair, letting the moment sink in. Sometimes people cross our paths in ways we can't predict. The gesture he'd made that day was small in the grand scheme of things, but for Sarah, it was life-altering. And for Marcus, it was a turning point. He'd discovered a side of himself he didn't realize existed, the part that could step up for others, even when it meant stepping outside his comfort zone. Life moved on. The baby grew older. Sarah and Mike managed the estate and built a stable future. Marcus flourished in his career, occasionally traveling for more big deals. Each trip, he found himself scanning the crowd, not in suspicion, but in openness. He'd remember a pregnant woman standing in a cramped aisle, exhausted and vulnerable. He'd remember how that one act of kindness led him to friendships, struggles, and a sense of meaning he hadn't experienced before. Years later, he received a wedding invitation in the mail. It was from Sarah's sister, whom he had never met. The invitation mentioned a family gathering. Sarah had insisted that Marcus be invited, calling him part of their extended circle now. Marcus considered it. He was busy, but the thought of reuniting with them made him smile. Ultimately, he decided to go. The day of the wedding, he arrived at a charming old church with stained glass windows. Inside, he spotted Sarah holding a toddler's hand, her daughter, the same baby he'd first seen in the hospital. The little girl clutched a tiny bouquet of flowers, looking around the bustling crowd with wide eyes. Sarah spotted Marcus and waved him over, smiling from ear to ear. "You made it!" she exclaimed. She introduced him to family members, some of whom seemed already to know who he was. They thanked him quietly for helping Sarah during her toughest moments. Marcus felt shy under their gratitude, but also strangely proud. Mike patted him on the back. "We owe you so much," he said, "but I know you'll say you were just doing what anyone would." Marcus laughed softly. "You know me well." They guided him to a seat, and the wedding ceremony began. As he watched the bride walk down the aisle, Marcus felt a swell of emotion. He glanced at Sarah and Mike, remembering everything they had endured. Their baby, no longer a baby, sat on Mike's lap, playing with the ribbon. Everyone looked content, free of past worries. Once the vows were exchanged and the ceremony concluded, the guests made their way to a small reception hall. There was music, dancing, laughter. Sarah and Mike introduced Marcus to more relatives. He sipped punch, feeling a pleasant warmth in the air. Eventually, Sarah asked him if they could talk for a moment. They found a quiet corner away from the music. She clasped her hands, searching for the right words. "I never told you this before, but the day you gave me your seat on the plane, I was terrified. I had just gotten bad news from my doctor, something about my blood pressure. Every little comfort made a difference. And if you hadn't done that, who knows how the flight would have gone?" He tried to wave it off, but she continued. "It's not just that. You chose to stick around, even when it got dangerous. I know you risked your own reputation and your peace of mind to help us. You proved that there are still good people in the world who do the right thing." Tears brimmed in her eyes, but she smiled. "So thank you. Your kindness changed everything for me and my family. My father's name is not dragged through the mud. My daughter can grow up without that burden of fear." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. "I'm grateful to have played a part," he managed to say. "You've taught me just as much about trust and perseverance." She hugged him, her embrace warm. Then Mike joined them, taking Sarah's hand, and the three of them stood quietly for a moment, acknowledging the unique bond they share. Later, they returned to the celebration, dancing to the lively music, chatting with guests. Marcus found a seat at one of the tables, watching the swirl of color and light, smiling at the improbable journey that had brought him here. As the evening wore on, guests began to leave, the newlyweds off to start their new life. Marcus said his farewells to Sarah and Mike, promising to keep in better touch. The drive back to his hotel was filled with reflections on how small choices can trigger massive shifts in life's trajectory. Once in his room, he sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long sigh of contentment. Days turned into weeks, and the wedding became a pleasant memory. Marcus continued to excel in his career, but a yearning for deeper connections sprouted in him. He started volunteering at local community centers, driven by the realization that sometimes all it takes to uplift someone is a single, genuine gesture. He didn't share this with many people, preferring to keep it personal. But inside, he carried the knowledge that he had once made a difference in one family's life, and that same difference could ripple outward in many ways. He still heard from Sarah every so often pictures of the child's milestones or updates on how they were traveling more confidently these days, unafraid of the ghosts from the past. Mike would occasionally send him a funny text or meme, a small reminder of their continuing friendship. He never forgot the first moment they introduced themselves in the airport coffee line, how awkward it had felt, how random it all seemed. Yet, looking back, it was meant to happen. The cosmic puzzle of life sometimes fits together in surprising ways. Whenever Marcus found himself on a plane, he would think of Sarah. He'd scan the rows, noticing if anyone struggled. He wouldn't always give up his seat sometimes. There was no need, but the mere awareness made him more empathetic. One day, he did see a young mother with two toddlers, eyes weary, trying to shuffle her belongings. He offered to help with her luggage. She accepted with palpable relief, and he felt that familiar spark of fulfillment. It wasn't about being recognized or praised, it was about being a decent human being. Looking ahead, Marcus couldn't predict what other challenges life would throw at him, but he felt a renewed confidence in his ability to face them. He had discovered a well of resolve and compassion within himself, proven by how he'd handled Sarah's troubles. No matter how uncertain the world might be, the power of a single kind act remained constant. And so, in the grand tapestry of his life, one seemingly small decision to give up a seat in first class became the thread that wove together trust, friendship, and justice. He didn't see it as an extraordinary act, but to the woman who needed it most, it made all the difference. Through danger and discovery, sorrow and triumph, they had emerged stronger and closer. Their story quietly stood as a reminder that kindness, once set in motion, can carry on, touching hearts and changing destinies in ways no one could have imagined. Did you enjoy this story of ambition, courage, and the power of one voice to spark change? Let us know in the comments. What part resonated with you the most, or which character's journey surprised you? We love hearing your thoughts. And, if you want more stories like this, full of twists, heart, and inspiration, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's plenty more where this came from, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey.